What's going on, guys? It is Laser here with another weekend video analysis. It's 9 a.m. in the morning, and we're here to drop another video as to where we see NIO going into next week. We just finished earnings on Friday, and pretty much just about every single big catalyst, whether they would be considered negative or positive, are out the way. No more major catalysts that we can expect. So it's back to business as usual for the stock. It's going to start moving back and building up and doing its own thing. Now, if you missed my last week's video, we drop one of these videos once per week. We talked about where we saw NIO going into last week. And for the most part, I mean, we a little bit undershot as to how high it was going to go. I actually called for 520 retest, actually, as a lower high pivot. But what ended up happening was we ended up getting it overshot that to the 786, and that's even more bullish in my eyes. Actually, it's great. But I've always saw it kind of forming like this pennant and building up a higher low. If you don't believe me, watch my last week's video. We talked about this. We talked about this lower high and pivot being formed. From a technical perspective, this is healthy. It's forming what I always like to call a long setup. So this is fantastic to see. The pullback was expected. Now, mind you, you had earnings bring it all the way down. But if you take a look here, for the most part, it's holding its original trend line, actually, which is still very, very much healthy. So, which brings me to my next point as to where we actually see NIO going into next week. In order for us to analyze as to where we see NIO going into next week, we'll not only look at NIO, we'll peek at Baba. And you'll look, Baba's down too. It's not just NIO. Baba's down a bit too. And we'll look at the Seng index. So where's our Seng? Seng index is right over here. We're going to look at the Dixie. And then we're going to come up with a conclusion as to where we see NIO going. We're going to try and piece together some puzzle pieces and actually try and share with you where we see things going. And once again, if you're new here, we drop one of these videos once per week. But more importantly, please do your own due diligence and research. If you're making a big financial decision, I'm just a guy who loves the stock, who likes dropping my analysis as to where I see the stock going. Having said all of that, let's talk about real quick as to where we see the stock going. Now, a lot of people are kind of like, it's dropped quite a bit, and they're not wrong. It dropped 18%, but you know what? It's getting more volatile. Volatile is good for both down and up. It makes the stock a lot more attractive to swing traders. Trust me, seeing this type of price action is way better than seeing like straight sideways price action. It's expanding. The price is expanding. And now we're going to talk about as to where we see the price going. Now, it dropped 18%. You don't drop 18% without giving you a lower high retest. So assuming the low is in, and I can't necessarily, I don't know for a fact if the low is completely in. We could see it swing and dive down a bit deeper. We could even see it go as low as 410, 412 again. It may want to kind of come back and retest that zone. Now, if I were playing like being conservative and saying like it's going to go all the way back down to 410, like if it's like the world is falling and NIO is just like, and the sentiment's poor and everyone's trying to dump NIO, whatever the case may be, and it wants to retest again that 410 level, your golden pocket would then be 492, which by the way would be, if we were to move this right around middle of that point, actually, which is funny. Now, I'm not saying that, I'm not trying to add confluence to say 410, because right now, for so far, it's actually, it's holding quite good. In fact, it looked like it wanted to bounce actually on Friday. I think a lot of this is a combination. I mean, even if there was no earnings and it dropped 4%, I mean, Baba dropped to 1% and they didn't have earnings either. And the Seng had a minus 2% day. So, I mean, we need to really just sit back and just see how this all unfolds. Now, what I do know is it's still holding. And what that means when you're holding, and right now the chart looks messy. So I'm gonna take out some of this, take out some of this, take out some of this. When we're holding a trend line and the price is on the upside, it's to assume that when you get a dip, as you can see, dips are built for the longs to get long. They're built for longs to re-enter to the stock. Now, notice how we launched really high up, coming back up down to this trend. These are dips designed for longs. Now, where and when shorts kind of come into the picture is when you get a break below the trend line, you get a retest, very important. It rejects. Now it's a game for shorts. Only if you get something like this, are shorts really into the picture. Now, this is also one of my trading strategies is actually drawing out two trend lines. You can see you got one, and then you had technically, I mean, we can say we have two. So you would even get something like this. So long as you don't get this, a rejection of that second trend line, flipping it into, which I don't see happening right now. I don't, okay? And stocks just don't go straight up, and they don't go straight down. So I want to highlight, this was our lower high and our lower pivot, which is good because it gives us now this trend line. You can see here, April 21st. It's funny because we're March. What's today's date? What is today's date? Does it say it here? I apologize. I'm trying to think. I think today's date here, I'll pull up my phone here. It's March 22nd. If you look at the option chain for April, it's stacked for NIO. And so anyways, I digress. We continue. Where are we going into next week? Assuming the bottom is in today, assuming it won't go below 456, you're going to see it come up and retest 501 or $5. I mean, that makes sense. $5, right? Basically went from 530 down to 430, rise back up and retest to 5. Okay. That would be my most, that's what I think into next week. And I would expect that to reject. I don't expect to see, it would be very rare to see that break out. And I would see it come down, but as it's coming down, and I want to point out too, relative to this is a lower low, but as it comes down this on the second time, which might take a couple of weeks to form, this would be your higher low that's forming. Now, there's also this scenario. It wouldn't be the end of the world if you saw it continue to decline into the bottom of this trend line, which would be around 418-ish, approximately around there, which would make the golden pocket retrace 494 instead of 5, a 6-cent difference. Like, you're still not going to see much. So you're going to get that post earnings dead cat bounce. It's going to happen to that golden pocket. I mean, like we saw it. I mean, you might even, the golden pocket, it just makes so much sense there. Right around that $5, 494 level. We want to form that higher low. Let's go back to the original scenario. This is how I honestly see it all playing out. You get it breaking out, second week of April. And in NIO fashion, it tends to, when it breaks out, barely. It likes to just barely keep you on. This is how it does. It'll barely break out. It'll slide on this, and it'll make you think it's not breaking out, but it is in fact a breakout. You get this nice little consolidation there. Whoosh! You're gonna get another big move. You can even measure the moves. So, I mean, if you want to know when the next move, assuming this was just like, you can do a trend-based fib extension. You could say, okay, from 410 up to 550, and assuming the bottom is in right here, your next big move is it could run you potentially. I mean, like, because it's the third, assuming it's like a third wave starting, and this was the first wave, and you're getting like a wave 2 pullback. I'm not an Elliott waves guy, but I understand that's the kind of like the concept behind it. Typically, the third wave is a bigger and much more stronger move. You would see that $6.66, and that's a very common spot. Or at the very least, you would see it come up and give you at least an equal distance move, so 580, potentially 6. A lot of people are worried NIO's cooked. I don't think so. 450 is still, it's still in a really, really good zone here. Now, this is my thesis. If I look just at NIO, I haven't actually looked at BABA. I have looked at the Hang Seng Index, but let's look together at the BABA and see how is BABA looking. So Baba, I had this anticipating going into 172. Now it's interesting because Baba broke out and it came back and it back tested this thing. It back tested this trend line. And you'll notice it's flipped this previous resistance into support. So it's extremely healthy. Very, 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 very healthy here. Okay. So we're holding above this key level for Baba. And Baba, I think someone mentioned to me, is one of the most heavily weighted stocks in all of China. The only time I think I would start thinking like I'm starting to get a little nervous about China if I start seeing Baba break down. And so far to the test, every single time Baba has held this, and it's been proving that it's been strong. And I'm fully anticipating Baba with this long range here to make that move. Now, because it's taken longer, that target just goes higher. And so long as this thing kind of moves up into that zone, 170, and so long as we hold under here, I'm still liking Baba. Baba still is holding. It's holding really important level. If Baba were bearish and China were bearish, you would actually see this. Like if the China rally was truly done, you would actually see it break below. It would come in for that retest, and you'd be looking at $93 on Baba. Could you imagine 30% correction? Now that's I'm not saying that's not a possibility, but I don't see that right now at all. You know what I see? I mean, you could argue that this was the breakout. Sorry, it's the wrong tool. You can argue that this was the breakout on Baba. That was the minor pullback, and then you got to move here. Or you could say, okay, this was your breakout, and this was your pullback, and now it's getting ready to make a bigger move higher. So I'm not 100% certain on either way, but it's looking good. Breakout on the velocity, pull back. Yeah, if you get a sharp reversal, it's game time for all the China still. Like this is like, let me erase this because you guys, it looks messy. I hate a messy chart. I'm gonna erase all this mess. Like that's tremendous strength on Baba, just holding there. Kind of looks like what does that look like to you guys? A bull flag? I mean, I think so. That's what it kind of looks like to me. But anyways, there's Baba. I'm not going to do a deep dive on Baba. We're gonna look at the Hang Seng Index. Hang Seng Index, I've always said that I talked about it in my tweet yesterday that it still looked good because it needed to hold that 2400 level. And then I think on Friday it said, we're going to break back under. Okay, now I want to point out some important things. We've still got higher lows forming and higher highs forming. So, right? So it's still from a trend perspective, it's still healthy. What we want to watch for on the Hang Seng Index, and again, remember, Baba is heavily weighted, so we don't just look at Hang Seng, we look at everything. We do want to watch the retest of 2400. We don't want that to turn into resistance. And it had a chance here to turn this into resistance and break under. Now, last week, if you missed my last week's video, where were we? We were like right here. And I'm like, oh, it's broken back above. And I think I said in my last week's video, it would be nice if it pushed out a little bit higher, which it did do, and it came back to retest it. Now, because it broke back under, you need to see the retest. And if it breaks back above, now let's play devil's advocate and say next week Hang Seng goes up. we get a dead cat bounce. Where's that golden pocket from that bottom? 24,400. So if we get something like this, a move up to 24,400, okay, back above the trend line, back down, we hold. Notice how back up, back down, you get that big move. So China's still working towards something really big, and they're not making it, like the chart's not making it very easy at all to try and anticipate. But there's other puzzle pieces we could look at that help us make our decision. We look at the Dixie. Now, we did the analysis on the Dixie, and we even have some of our arrows coming in here. And I talked about this. We have two trend lines here, and it hasn't even really formed our secondary trend line, but I talked about it coming up and retesting, which it looks like it did. And it's right at resistance. This is right at resistance. Wait, did it break out? It might have broken out. It did break out, but that's quite okay because we go based off two trend lines. So it's forming the top of this rally. And the real big point here, the defining moment here for the Dixie is going to be that 104.89 zone. So long as it stays below 104.80, because right now this setup is almost prim for bears to run this all the way back down to 98 for the Dixie. And bears in the Dixie means there's bulls across the market. So if we go to the 98, you can just imagine the amount of positive pressure that will actually put on the rest of the market. Dixie and that's just traditionally how it works. It's kind of like an inverted thing. Dixie goes down, which is the US dollar, then your stock market tends to go higher. So it looks like it's going to want to form that higher low. Where's the golden pocket on this? Interesting. So it'll be very interesting if it actually does want to rise back, because if it gets up to 106, which we do not want to see, we don't want to see that. And it's a possibility. If we saw a move like this on the Dixie, you got to start to question and think like, okay, are we going to see 110 and 111? We don't want to see this, okay? What we want to see is we want to see a rejection here. And we just want to see it come all the way back down to 98. That's where we're going for. So we're still looking good. Now we're going to dive back into NIO here. We're going to look at the velocity to try and get some hints, to find some more confluence, because just looking at the chart alone is not enough. Sometimes we try and find some hints here actually. So if you take a look, when we look at our velocity, we have this healthy looking uptrend on the velocity. And we just made a higher high. So long as we hold this level, we can get continuation. And I believe that's exactly what's going to happen. I believe, it'll curl down, it'll curl up. It'll be, instead of like these ups and downs, it'll be more like this. It curls. That's how I envision and imagine that's going to play out. Something along those lines. Now, if I were to look at some bigger time frames, let's erase everything. Keep it clean. Let's look at the 2 weeks for a second. It's an interesting spot right now because it's in an uptrend and it's trying to form a higher high in that velocity actually. And I think in order for it to do that, it's going to want to eventually take out 772. So it doesn't really give us a lot of data. We'll do the weekly. It's kind of like the same chart here. See, that's funny. Very, very, very funny looking chart on the weekly. You know what I see? I see a breakdown and then a break up. Whenever you get a breakout, a breakdown, you need to get that pullback. And it failed. This is a fake breakout. So it broke back above, and now it's pulling back. And it's the exact same chart on the week on the daily here, guys. It actually broke down here and then it broke back above. Broke down, broke back above, and now we're going to get that swing down. So long as it holds, we're Gucci. This run's still good. And if it was the end of the world, I think you would actually see a much more negative reaction. Like I've seen many earnings reports. Finishing off minus 4% is not bearish at all. At all. That's not a bearish like day for an earnings day. If they wanted to launch this thing down, they would have. If they wanted to send this thing, why they should have done it by now. But all signs are looking real good. And I know the sentiment is quite bearish. But I don't see it yet. Now, I will wrap up the video and I will point out a bearish scenario. I actually did it in one of my previous videos. You'd have to watch one of my previous videos, but I did something along the lines of this. Actually, I'm not sure if it's going to work, but I'll see if I can get it. I don't know if I did that right. What was the high here? The high was 1439. And what was the low? The low was 116. Okay, let's get it right down to the penny. Beep, 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 beep. These are like historical, like Fibonacci. Okay, do you see that? Now, you can see how bounce, tested and rejected. Now, this is the bearish scenario that can play out, potentially. Because if that's it, and we're going to get like a longer pullback, we can connect these two. Let's see if this works. Does this work? Oh my God. Are you joking me? Look at that. You could easily do something like that. I mean, I'm not even sure if I'm drawing that nicely. Approximately. So you kind of get to the end of that wedge there. And wouldn't that be like something, you know? Now, I would say this, guys. So long as NIO is above 409, the bears don't have an argument. And you'll notice the bears have failed 3 times to actually hold it below there. Recently, there it failed, it came back here. And if it did come down here to that 409 level, so long as we get that bounce level, that's great. And if I were being conservative, and this is like a bit more of a bearish scenario, I would draw out this trend line like this because there is support there. This is the bearish scenario. I'm not even actually leaning towards this, but I wanted to put it out there because it's important to know there's a possibility that this can happen. You know, let's say it comes down to 410. It goes up to 490, whatever, I think 494, forms the lower high. And then it just works itself down. Works itself down to like that triple bottom there at 470. And then you kind of work yourself in right in this like wedge here. Just more accumulation, which is insane. Like the amount of accumulation in this range is ridiculous. 596, potentially this is going to be your run where you, oops. So despite it being like a bearish scenario, it's just a longer path. a longer path, right? And it works itself out there. I actually painted this as like a potential path. I'd have to find the tweet or I'd have to find the post. I was like, and the reason why I was kind of like concerned about something like this, and I'll explain this from a velocity perspective before I wrap up my video. And it's not always the case, but when you get a lower low on that velocity, it's usually with the velocity on the 200-day, this yellow line is the 200-day moving average. And usually what needs to happen is it needs to come up and come down and form a higher low before you get the big squeeze. And say it comes down here, right? It needs to do something like that, where it gives you this dip, but it's forming on like a bigger time frame, on a slower time frame. The 200-day moving average is forming a higher low. Now I'll show you something very similar, and this was always kind of one of my like concerns. We're going to just erase this here. We're going to erase all the drawings here for a second. You had that lower low. Wrong color. We'll change that to orange so you guys can see. That lower low got formed. We'll use arrows so you guys can see nicely. Lower low on the 200-day moving average, and you kind of had that short rally. Was that what this was? A short rally? Maybe. But I want to point out something that's completely different here for you, okay? So this setup was making lower lows the whole time, and I don't think it is. I don't think it's gonna be the same thing because this was making lower lows the whole way through. This time it's different. This is actually making higher lows. It's a much more different looking setup to me. And to me, I remain bullish. And I'm going to show you another company. I think it was Li Auto. So if you take a look at Li Auto, which a lot of you guys love to pay attention to, like, how is Li Auto so much higher than NIO or XPEV? I want to point out that they had a lower velocity on a 200-day moving average. And we consolidated in this range, their base range here, for a good chunk of time. And it was able to push higher and form higher lows and continue to push higher, actually. So it actually never made new lows. And this is your higher low. So if we were to go back to NIO, there is a scenario where it forms a higher low, and so does the price. And the price doesn't need to make new lows. You know, the price doesn't have to make new lows on that velocity. And I saw Li Auto do that. I think XPEV had something similar too. Not 100% certain. Okay. So notice XPEV as well is kind of similar. If you look into XPEV, how it made a lower low on the velocity, and then it made a big move, and it turned into more of like a consolidation range where you got that higher low to only explode way higher. And it did the exact same thing here. Lower low, and it still remains like on higher points. You got the higher low, now the higher low. I think NIO can be very much, it can play out in the same fashion, and it's not the end of the world. Like this setup was a long time ago. This was like a year and like, no, this was like 2 years ago. How long ago was that? Yeah, a year and a half ago. It was a long time ago. And I think the setups are different this time. So I don't want people to kind of like be panicking. The last thing you want to do is be panicking actually here. And chart still looks great. There's still a lot of potential, and there's some key levels of support that are still holding. So going into next week, just to wrap it up, I feel like I'm rambling. I always ramble here. But I do this with, basically, I'm not editing my videos either. I want to point out that when I make these videos, you just hear my thoughts like completely. If the bottom is in from that earnings day, which it could be, I would look for that retest at $5. And if it wants to come in at a bit lower, You know, if it wants to come in and give you a little bit of a lower range here, like even if it came down as low as, what did I say, 409? Let's just say it came down to 409. That golden pocket retest should have you come back and retest 490. So we're finishing off this dip here, and there will be a dead cat bounce up into that golden pocket. Where is this? Let's see. So we can easily see something like this. Comes back down, sweeps the low at 435, back up, gets that higher low, and then we could do that. We could totally do something like that. So again, you look at all the puzzle pieces, it's still there. We're game. And that's it. I got to stop myself here, not because I'm running out of time, but because I think you guys are running out of time. I don't know how long you guys want to hear me ramble and talk about NIO. We love the stock. We love talking about where it's going. Again, thank you guys so much for supporting my videos and dropping a comment section. I do read all the comments. I try and respond to each and every single one of you when I can. If I missed something and you guys had some questions, don't forget to drop those questions in the comment sections below. I appreciate all of you guys, and I hope you guys all have a wonderful, wonderful morning and a wonderful, wonderful weekend. Cheers.